because to talk about the mood in Washington, what is Washington? Washington, D.C. is the seat of government. The seat of government, of course, is, the executive branch and the legislative branch, but the seat of government is also the various departments, organizations, administrations, and then the foundation of, the foundational infrastructure that sustains government. We can call it whatever we want, the deep state, but the permanent bureaucracy, supported by academia, supported by various, economic institution. I mean, we always talk about, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. That's part of, the seat of government. It's the heartbeat of America. It's where policy is made in America. And there are processes involved in the making of policy. Just to speak about lobbying, the way lobbyists work, to infiltrate ideas into government, into the various deliberative bodies of government, both those established by law and those that aren't. Don't think that, when a bunch of executives get together over lunch to talk about, what the policy should be about X, Y, and Z, that may not be established by Congress, but that is as much as powerful as any congressional deliberative body, because those people then influence lobbyists who go to Congress and the money that flows and things like this. What I'm trying to say is that's how one normally would evaluate what's happening. That question, what's happening in Washington, D.C.? To attack that problem, I would take apart Washington, D.C., and then, filter it through the specific policies you're asking about. How is Iran policy made today? Well, it's not made in the traditional manner that Iran policy should be made. For instance, there should be, a directive from the president that's filtered down through the National Security Advisor that's then farmed out to the various, departments or agencies who will then act on that by creating committees, both internal to their agency and committees of an interagency basis that are formed based upon the directive to solve a specific problem. They will then send taskers out. Some of these taskers involve getting economic information. Some involve getting intelligence information, other sources of information. They will inform themselves. They will hold consultations. They bring in people. I've been brought into many, deliberative bodies within the interagency process over time to give testimony, to answer questions so that they can, again, empower themselves with knowledge and information to come up with answers to the problem set directed for them to resolve. And they'll work together and come up with a consensus that'll be fed through the president using, the processes of government. Congress will be informed. There will be consultation between the executive and the legislative to make sure there's a balance, and then policy will be made. And then when policy is made, everybody goes, when the president says, execute X, Y, and Z, everybody goes, they know what it is because they said, we were involved in the making of that policy. So when you say, what's going on in Washington, generally would just say, how are people responding to actions that then can be compared to the objectives set by formal policy? What's going on in Washington, D.C.? That's not how it works today, Nima. It works today, the president wakes up and puts out a social media post. That's policy. Staffers no longer attend interagency processes. Staffers wait. They're like a fire brigade waiting for an arsonist to set a fire. And the president is the arsonist. The fire is a social media post. And he'll say something and the people go, well, what do we do? Now they run around and you have people working cross purposes. Is the Treasury Department's sanctioning program coincides with the Department of Defense's, blockade program? Are the two coordinated, or are they just operating independent of one another? Because when the president says, in order to do this, we need certain sanctions to be lifted against Iranians. Has that been filtered down to the Department of War now so that they can allow certain shipping to come through? No, there's just no coordination. They operate totally independent of one another based upon what people think the president wants, based upon social media postings that haven't been sent through a deliberative process. So what's going on in Washington? Total chaos, total anarchy, total confusion. There is no Iran policy. There is no Iran policy because you can't call day-to-day reactive reality policy. That's just panic. To have a staff member wake up in the morning waiting for a social media post so they can run out and deal with the problem as it emerges is not. What does this president want? I mean, one day we're told we're preparing for a massive strike. The next day we're told that we're lifting sanctions against 3 IRGC people. One day the president's working with Oman to, open up a shipping lane so he can say the Strait of Hormuz is open. The next day he's overreacting to an Omani collaboration with the Iranians about how that would actually be implemented, threatening to bomb Oman. Really? I mean, did you understand what I just said? One day we're going to be working with the Omanis. The next day we're going to be bombing the Omanis. What's happening in Washington, D.C.? Not a frickin' thing. Nothing's happening in Washington, D.C. because it self-negates because of the emotional instability of the madman who currently occupies the White House. That's what's happening in Washington, D.C. Now, let me take a step back, because I do believe, even though we have all of this madness, there are certain normative realities that have come into being. If it's just like anything, if you just take a step back and let nature do its thing, nature finds a balance. And I think what we're seeing right now, even though the president is stirring things up, we're finding a policy balance. And again, people can disagree. You may disagree. I don't care. I just say what I think anyways. I think there's a policy balance right now that are based upon certain realities. The reality for the United States is that we cannot. See, whenever people say there's airplanes flying around Iran and we may attack again, with what? With what? Did we magically grow missiles overnight? Did we magically increase the number of long-range strike weapons available to us? No. We know we're down to as close to zero as we can, and we know that there's concern in the Pacific and Europe that we don't have enough weapons to deal. The big question being asked right now in policy circles is, what happens if Russia and China get together and say, screw it, let's do a simultaneous attack? What happens if China says, we're taking Taiwan at the same time the Russians say we're taking the Baltics? Now, I think that's just irresponsible thinking, because neither China nor Russia thinks in those terms. But of course, we tend to mirror image ourselves, because we would do that. We would say, now's the time to strike, because we're a warmongering bunch of people, Europe and the United States. So we're projecting onto Russia and China our own behaviors. But the problem when answering that question, you have to come up with an answer. And the answer is, if they attack, we got nothing. The realization suddenly that we got nothing except tactical nuclear weapons. That's why Colby is putting forward new policy that says that we will use tactical nuclear weapons preemptive early on in any conventional conflict, because we don't have anything. So having said that, unless the president's planning on nuking Iran, and I don't believe he is, what are we going to do? We're not going to attack Iran, not in a military significant fashion. And I'll talk about there will be moments where there will be clashes. And I think this is going to be the new permanent reality. But now let's talk about Iran. So we know the United States is not inclined to carry out a massive military attack against Iran, because we can't. We can't sustain it. Iran. You hear a lot of talk. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Iran needs economic stability. You know that. I know that. That's their number one priority. Economic stability over the long term requires, of course, certain realities to emerge in the Middle East, one of which is to get rid of the most destabilizing influence in the Middle East, the United States, and then to make it so that what happened in February never happens again. But we know that there's no MOU. It's dead, has been dead, and there will not be an MOU. That just isn't going to happen. So without an MOU, without a ceasefire, without any understanding, what understanding exists? The understanding of nature, the balancing of America can't continue large-scale military operations against Iran. And Iran needs periods of stability to promote economic, activity, which is necessary for sustainment of national viability. And so what you see is that both sides have gravitated towards an understanding that avoids conflict. Now, because there is no formal agreement, and because this is sort of nebulous, you'll see them balancing into each other once in a while. They'll bounce. And when you see that bounce, you suddenly get a moment of conflict. Boom. Bombing this, bombing that, missiles here, missiles there, that self-terminate as they gravitate away from one another, back to the balance. And I think that's the situation we're in right now, where both the United States and Iran acknowledge that there will be no short-term solution. Hell, Iran doesn't even want to talk to Trump for 2 years. All right. So if Iran says that, do you honestly believe that Iran is looking for a 2-year war? No. Iran's looking for 2 years of relative stability to increase their military capabilities. As they said, we're building missiles every day, but also to increase their economic health. They need to rebuild. A lot of stuff was blown up. They need to rebuild it. It's tough to rebuild when you're getting blown up again. And the United States, while we may not be able to defeat Iran, we can blow a lot of things up. We've proven that. I don't think Iran's in the business of getting things blown up anymore. That doesn't mean they'll shy away from a fight, but I don't think Iran's saying, let's have another 2 months sustained bombing campaign where a whole bunch of our infrastructure gets destroyed. They're not looking for that. They're not looking to pick a fight with anybody. They will respond as needed when necessary. But in the meantime, I think we're looking at a period of time up to at least the midterms where you're not going to see a major escalation of violence. You're going to see a maintenance of the status quo, where the United States can proclaim a steel wall that doesn't stop anything. Iran can talk about the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, but it's really not open because it's not open until traffic is flowing through in a normative fashion. And as long as this conflict is there won't be normal rates of traffic. That's bad for Iran, by the way. Income generation, Iran generates income by having the Strait of Hormuz open, stuff getting to market. So do the Gulf Arab states. And so you're going to see just the laws of nature come into play where you're going to get some norms taking place, where things are going to get to an area where both sides are saying, this isn't perfect, but we can live with this. The United States can live with the perception of containment, and Iran can live with a modicum of economic growth. And you're going to be dealing with this, and they're going to collide every once in a while. Things are going to go boom. But this is what we're going to see for a matter of months. I think after the midterm elections, Donald Trump will, again, because we can't escalate, we don't have the ability to do so. I think at that point in time, Donald Trump becomes empowered, depending on the results, to begin to withdraw from the Middle East, which I think is ultimately the direction we're going. I think Iran understands that. And therefore, what's that old saying? Never get in the way of the enemy when they're doing what you want them to do. And in the long-term strategic, I think the United States is looking for unplugging from the Middle East, not doubling down on stupid. And Iran is not going to get in the way. But because none of this exists in a formal agreement, no formal structure designed to keep the two sides apart, there will be a drifting. They will collide. There will be moments of violence, and then they'll drift back apart because that's the natural balance I think both sides are in right now. That's what I think is happening in Washington, D.C.
If I'm not mistaken, one of the members of the Iranian parliament said, when it was all about, Iran is trying to assassinate Donald Trump did this and that, they put him in catering, it's all about, but he came out, he said, why do we need to assassinate Donald Trump? The guy is destroying the United States. Why do we need to assassinate him? Who's going to do that? I think this is the understanding. And the other point is, Scott, Iran is not, my understanding of Iranian position, they're not seeking any sort of escalation, but they want to control the situation with Donald Trump. They want to manage the situation, in the hope of maybe after Donald Trump, someone else going to come in and that's going to change the whole atmosphere between Iran and the United States. But the problem is we had the same thing with the Biden administration. We thought that, the Biden, he's going to go out. We're not going to have any sort of nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine. But everything got, today, look at the situation. It's worse than what it was before, And what is your perception of the whole case of the Iran and the United States in the West Asia? I'm talking basically about the Strait of Hormuz, because the main problem for Donald Trump is the Strait of Hormuz. And today he said, you would be amazed what he said today. He said that we have an alternative for the Strait of Hormuz. The alternatives are Texas, Alaska, Louisiana, and the people are coming here to buy. But this is just making, Donald Trump says this way, and you see Scott Bessent talking about underground pipelines going, somehow in order to diminish the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. But after all, there has to be something practical, and you don't see that coming with the current administration.
It's curious. I mean, I don't know too much about pipeline construction, underwater pipeline construction. I'm just a simple Marine. I don't do that kind of stuff for a living. I did follow the construction of the Nord Stream pipeline. I followed it very closely because, as you know, that the United States tried to prevent the Russians from completing, or the consortium that was working with Gazprom to complete that. And so, became knowledgeable of pipeline construction as you watch the pipeline work its way down the Baltic and get closer to the port. What was being done, it was fascinating. The amount of infrastructure that went into that, and the thing is, you got to put ships out there that have to lower it down there. There's a big ship that does that, and it just lowers it down there. And then you got these guys go down there and they put it together. It sort of implies stability, though. I would have a hard time imagining one of these ships lowering a pipe as an Iranian cruise missile was slamming into it. So I'm always struck when people talk about making these underground pipelines. How the hell are you going to do that? Because they just don't grow themselves. It's not like Jack and the Beanstalk, and you throw a couple magic beans out there, throw water on it. Next thing you know, you got an underground pipeline. You're like, whoa, how'd that happen? I don't know, magic. And it takes years to do this. I mean, there's no way an underground pipeline would take place in the administration of Donald Trump. So right off the bat, you know that Scott Bessent is smoking dope. He's lying. There will be no underground pipeline that emerges in a way that impacts the current crisis of the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, I can pretty much guarantee you that you can't build an underground pipeline in times of war. Okay, that just isn't going to happen. And so, gosh, there's a problem, Scott, because you're building the underground pipeline because you can't open up the Strait of Hormuz because you have insufficient military capacity to do so. So if you can't open up the military, you can't open the Strait of Hormuz because you lack the military power to do so, how are you going to protect the assets building the underground pipe? It's just crazy sometimes how people talk and nobody thinks through the problem. Again, I'm just a simple Marine. I don't claim to know about anything, but I pretty much can guarantee you can't build an underwater pipeline in a time of war because all your assets will be sunk. That's straight up. Went off on that. Go, feed that initial question. I had the answer. It's right on the tip of my tongue.
It's about the Strait of Hormuz, the way that, the question is, Donald Trump, he says that we have the alternatives. He's mentioning.
Okay, now I got it. I'm there. Well, again, let's just the alternative. The alternative, what, Texas? So we're going to create. It's again the inherent inconsistency and insanity of Donald Trump. Why are we opposing Russia in Ukraine today?
Good question.
Because the Russian people that live in the former territories of eastern Ukraine woke up one morning to find out that the constitutionally elected president of Ukraine was no longer in power because the CIA and National Endowment for Democracy and other outside agencies fomented a coup d'etat, a violent coup d'etat, by the way, that they tried to blame on Yanukovych and the Berkut police, but it turns out it was the Nazi snipers that killed everybody, not the Ukraine. And we empowered these Nazis to come in who hated Russians and to outlaw the Russian language and began killing Russians. They called the Russian speakers of Eastern Ukraine anti-terrorists, and they implemented an anti-terrorist operation that sent the military against these people. So they rounded up to defend themselves, and then implementing basic human right that has been set forth in the Charter of the United Nations of self-determination. They eventually said, we don't want to be part of this Nazi regime in Ukraine that bans everything we stand for. We want to be independent. And later on, they want to be part of Russia. So they went through these processes and Russia intervened. And we said, you can't do that about territorial integrity, sovereignty. I mean, these are big core issues for America, right? What's the president saying now? That we're just going to go in and declare the Strait of Hormuz to be American territory? That we're going to, we're going to have a referendum? Is he proposing a referendum? That's curious. Are the Iranian people going to get to vote in that referendum? Do you think the Omani people would actually vote in favor of that referendum? Qatar, the United Arab Emirates? The man's insane, literally insane. And anybody who promulgates this thinking is irresponsible in the extreme. This concept should be dismissed outright, and he should be ignored. Nobody should react to anything he says. Just ignore him because It's a non-starter. You can't even begin to get to where he wants to get. First of all, the thing about Texas, Mr. President, is you need to have a guy named Sam Houston that kicks the crap out of Santa Ana. Okay? It's sort of what made Texas, Texas. The ability of Texas to actually break free of Mexico. You need to win a war. You haven't done that. You haven't won a war. You lost a war. You didn't win a war. You lost a war. In order to have Alaska, you have to have a country that actually owns the totality of the territory willing to sell it to you legally. Now, if the Strait of Hormuz was a singularity, meaning its own standalone nation, we might have something to go on here. The president might be able to say, let's talk to the Strait of Hormuz. Let's talk to the nation, the Hormuz people, and get them to decide they want to be part of America. All you Hormuzians over there, join America. Yay. Maybe. But the Strait of Hormuz is not a singularity. Last time I checked, there's a whole bunch of lines on a map saying this belongs to this country, this belongs to that country, and none of them get along. They don't. So it's a non-starter. The Strait of Hormuz is actually, again, come back to what we talked about earlier. It's a self-solving problem, to be honest. If I were advising the President of the United States, knowing that politically it's impossible for him to admit defeat, I would tell the United States Navy to prepare for a 2-year presence in the Arabian Sea, and we'll call it the Wall of Steel, Operation Wall of Steel. Now, we know it's not a Wall of Steel, but we're just going to call it the Operation Wall of Steel, and we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to say it's there. So every day the president can send out a thing that says, we're maintaining our blockade against Iran, 100% success. Never bring the debt. Don't talk about the details. Just say it. Maintaining our blockade of Iran, 100% success. So now we have a policy of the maintenance of the blockade of Iran. And that causes some problems for the Iranians, insurance issues and things of that nature. And then don't do a damn thing. Let the Strait of Hormuz solve itself. Because what will happen is all the nations in the Gulf will get together and say, how do we get ships to flow through here? Kuwait needs ships to flow through there. I'm just telling you, UAE isn't going to build any magic underwater pipeline. 2 years, that's Trump's term. That's when the Iranians aren't talking to him. In 2 years, in less than 2 years, in 6 months, the Strait of Hormuz problem will resolve itself if the United States does nothing other than maintain a blockade. And when I say maintain a blockade, just park ships there. Hell, I don't know, every week go ahead and board one just for fun. Just to make it everybody know, tell the Navy, go out there and board a ship. Board a ship. Navy will love to because they're bored out there as long as you feed them. And we seem to have a problem feeding our sailors. But if we can feed them, they'll go board a ship and they'll produce a video and CNN will play it. And the American people will say, my God, we're maintaining one hell of a blockade. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz opens up. And instead of having 13% of capacity flowing through, we'll have close to 100% capacity. It won't be 100 because Iran isn't going to allow shipping affiliated with Israel or the United States to go through. But you'll see the other states say we need peace with Iran. We need normal relations, and they'll start establishing it. The Strait of Hormuz solves itself in Iran's favor if nothing is done, and that's what I would advise the president. Just don't do anything. Let Mother Nature run its course. When I was in college, I always laughed about the way the sidewalks were laid out, because I'd come out of my dorm and there'd be a sidewalk just going straight up there. And I'm like, well, how the hell did they decide to put the sidewalk that way? And then I talked to one of the managers. They said, well, back when in the day, because it's a college that was made in the 1700s, students just walked to classroom. And students take the most practical route. And all we did is take a photograph above and we said, that's where our sidewalks are going to go. We're just going to lay down sidewalks where the students naturally go. Nature takes its course. Let the Strait of Hormuz define itself. If you do this, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, they're all going to come together and say, what do we need to do? Because we all benefit with the strait being open. How do we make this happen so that everybody, and this will not just lead to economic understandings, but political understandings as well. And again, from the United States perspective, we lost a war. The question is, how do we clean it up? The more we try to intervene now to force an issue with a weak hand, it doesn't work. Give it 6 months of doing nothing. Let Mother Nature decide what's going to happen. And then come in and say, all right, now that you've created this, how can we unplug without disrupting this? And that's the key, to be as least disruptive as possible to something that is operating to the economic benefit of the collective, of the world, of the United States. This is what I would advise the president. It's a damn good, it's the way to go. But he's not going to do it because this president has to be in control and people are going to wake up and piss him off in the morning. I mean, again, Oman, 1 minute. 1 minute we're working with the Omanis on how to negotiate passage to the Strait. Next minute we're bombing them or threatening to bomb them. How do you do this? 1 minute with the Iranians, we're lifting sanctions on the IRGC. The next minute we're talking about resuming a massive bombing campaign. I mean, this is the kind of policy inconsistency that creates paralysis. I think Iran in the long term is going to allow Mother Nature to run its course. Iran's already taken the approach that I've recommended, just hands off. Trump, we're not dealing with him. We're not dealing with Trump. We're just going to let Mother Nature do its thing. And if the United States did that as well, Mother Nature, the natural course of events, because everything works on a pattern. I mean, people need to eat. That means we're going to find ways to get food to the table, which means that people are going to collaborate on how to get crops, picked, processed, and transported. And you just let the natural course of things decide this. People need fuel. People need these things. We already have infrastructure in place that will naturally gravitate to meeting the needs of the collective if we just let it do its business without, imposing wars on it to be disruptive. We lost a war. The United States lost a war. There's people out there that don't want to admit it, but we lost a war. The best thing to do right now is figure out how we can repair the damage done by conflict, and the best way is to ensure that there is no future conflict, and the best way is just to let the locals. How do you stop this may not work with gang wars, but how do you stop a local fight? Get the outsiders the hell out of the way. Remove the outside pressure. And you'll find that locals will come up with compromises that allow things to happen so that life returns to normalcy. Local solutions are the best solutions. And right now, the Strait of Hormuz needs a local solution, not one that's dictated by a mad, insane, cult leader in Washington, D.C.